I'm sure you talk to other people and, you know, they go, oh, songs. And it was just an incredibly hard record to make, incredibly hard.
None of us came back with the idea that we were going to make Violate at all. Certainly not Flood.
I think it was okay, the obvious thing, repeat Violator, let's not do that, let's move it a step up again.
Alan, I think, liked the idea of playing, you know, real drums and things like that, so it was a sort of a conscious decision.
Violator's very programmed still, you know, there's lots of individual sampled sounds, but they're all programmed on the exact beats in the bar, whereas later we would use chunks of performance that had all the inherent mistakes and humanity. And for me, the combination of using all that modern technology with all that character is what makes more interesting music.
You take me there, you take me where the kingdom comes. You take me to, lead me through Babylon. This is the morning of valor. This is the dawning of valor.
I think Martin was the one who was feeling that pressure to make us as successful a record as Violator.
Yeah, I mean, Andy's always got this thing, he always says that I work better under pressure, which I'm not so sure is true.
I think everybody felt under pressure. And I suppose part of my job was to try and take the pressure off and say, look guys, if this record does half of what Violator did, it'll still be a huge success, you know. I don't think it worked though, particularly. I think they still felt it.
Although I did feel more pressure, you know, I still felt that I was writing, you know, good songs.
Everybody felt comfortable in the fact that there was a bulk of stuff to work from that was really good. I Feel You, Walking in My Shoes, which everybody sort of felt was like one of the best songs Martin had ever written. We had one brief meeting and listened to Martin's demos. That was it. There was no pre-production at all, which in hindsight I think was a big mistake.
I think that was a problem, because they kind of, the first phase of the record was really the pre-production.
The way it previously worked was that Martin always did the demos and they listened and they would work out what songs they preferred, which direction the songs would go in, and I don't think they had a programming session, which they always had. There was no pre-production and they weren't in a studio.
We talked about how we could go about recording, and Flood had just come off the back of working with U2 on one of their albums. They'd put their own studio together in a property, in a building, and he thought that had worked out quite well, so we should try the same thing. So we did a bit of searching around, came up with this place, and we were all going to live there together and record together. It was going to be wonderful. Well, it didn't really work out that way.
Yes, I'm burning my footsteps. Keep the same appointments I get. If you try walking in my shoes, if you try walking in my shoes.
I think we looked into studios in Spain, didn't we?
Yeah, we looked.
And I think Alan and Flood actually went out there to have a look and couldn't find a suitable studio, and then the people from Mute found this villa in a suburb of Madrid. Flood said, yeah, okay, that room's the live room, that's the control room.
Did they have a disco in there?
Had a disco in the basement, which was the drum room. It was a bit weird. It was kind of salmon and black marble. It was very kind of Al Pacino in Scarface.
More ways than one, probably. Yeah. But it was like it was in the diplomatic quarter, wasn't it? So it was quite a
I don't think there was much diplomacy going on. it was the longest they'd been away from each other for, I suppose, 11 years.
And they didn't talk to each other all the time.
No, they weren't like phone buddies or anything. And then all of a sudden, February, I think it was early February of '92, we just thought they all just landed in this villa in Madrid, and it was an odd one. Yeah.
The day before we actually went out to Madrid to start working, we all just met up in a bar in London, and that was the first time that all four of them had been together in a room, and there were a lot of surprises.
I'd moved to Los Angeles at that point and sort of been hanging out there on the strip with these new bands that were up and coming, like Jane's Addiction and stuff like that, that to me were really exciting, and I hadn't seen that or experienced that since I sort of went to see The Clash or something. And so I went back with this attitude of like, we've got to make a rock record, you know. I was all gung-ho and like, you know, we got to move on, you know, we got to learn to play some instruments, you know. And you know, the rest of the guys were not part of my plan.
You still imagine that bands are like the Beatles and they all live in full houses, which are actually all the same house, but they don't. You know, if Dave's living in LA and the others living somewhere else, then it's a different thing. They're about to go through different emotions and different things are happening within their lives.
One of them, it might have been Fletch, was a bit freaked out because in reference to a band, Dave said, yeah, I really dig them, and it was instead of I really like them, and he was kind of a bit it was, maybe it's common in people's vernacular now, but at the time, dig was a bit rock and roll, and I think that was a bit...
It was very American.
Very American. What do you mean you dig them?
When I came back with like hair down here, I think I weighed about 120 pounds or something, and in retrospect it was probably pretty shocking, the changes that had certainly happened to me during that time.
As soon as we started working on it, it was obvious really that we were suffering somehow, and that we weren't finding it easy to A, sort of come back together as a unit having had a bit of a break, and B, kind of live up to perhaps the success of Violator.
The kind of atmosphere that prevailed around the beginning of the recording of that album was pretty poor, and I think the band were they had the songs and they were really searching for direction and were getting nowhere fast.
I played bass, I think Martin played guitar. We had a sort of drum machine going. Someone else might have been on bongos or something, and we were jamming. You know, we'd never really done that ever. Only for fun, maybe in the other room, you know, as a sort of break from the studio. But we'd never actually done that. We'd always sat down with computers, keyboards, started programming the drums up, and so I think it was inevitable. It would take time to get used to that way of working. And perhaps we didn't really. Perhaps the frustration of not immediately getting a result wore us down, whereas in fact if we'd have just accepted, look, this is the way many bands actually record, you know.
Daniel said when he first came out, after sort of 6 weeks of, maybe 6 weeks or a few weeks of recording anyway, there was nobody even in the studio.
I just remember walking in and there was like the engineer was sitting by the mixing desk with his feet up on the desk asleep. Fletcher and Martin were sitting on the sofa reading the sports pages of the tabloids. Dave was up in his room painting or whatever with his candles and everything. Alan was just in some other part of the building just playing drums to himself, and Flood was lying on the floor trying to get a sound from a big modular synthesizer. I thought, oh god, this doesn't feel right.
I remember the first 4 weeks was pretty much unusable.
I can remember me and Alan sitting in the airport in Madrid after the first batch, and our plane was like 4 hours late or something like that, and Alan going, let's get a beer, and then he toasted me and he said, here's to a complete fucking waste of time.
The vibe between the recording of Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion were, you know, like worlds apart. You know, in Milan while we were doing Violator, you know, we were going out, you know, virtually every night as a gang, you know, partying and, you know, working during the day, and it was all fun. When we got to Madrid, I didn't even realise at the time, I was too blind and naive to it, but, you know, I just knew that Dave would disappear for days. You know, I didn't realise that he'd, you know, developed his heroin addiction. You know, Alan's really a Gemini, and he can either, you know, decide to party, or he can decide to, you know, stay in and eat apples, and he was just like staying in and eating apples. I mean, obviously working as well, but it just didn't feel like there was cohesion in the band.
We really were batting on different teams, and Flood was stuck in the middle. I mean, I remember having conversations with Flood. I was oblivious to the fact as well it was anything to do with me.
I don't think Flood was at his breaking point with us. You know, but when we started Songs of Faith and Devotion, but he definitely had enough by the end of that one.
I struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled with it, and it was like pulling teeth.
It was a bit claustrophobic, yeah, because, you know, you come down to the kitchen in the morning, so you never got a break from each other at all. You know, you never had that which you'd normally get, even if you recorded in a studio which had when you were staying in a hotel, you'd get that time in your hotel room.
We lived in this place, so you washed your clothes in there. There was a little laundry room, and it was a house, you know, a big old house. And I remember being in there with Flood, and I swear he was in tears, like, you know, because he was at such a loss of like what to do to pull this thing together.
In the face of adversity, you often produce your best work, and I actually believe during that period, which was the most difficult time I can remember in the group, we came up with some of the strongest things we've ever done, which is like Walking My Shoes and In Your Room, two of my all-time favourite tracks, I'd say. I think we'd certainly moved further away from each other as individuals than we'd ever been. Dave obviously had his troubles, but because he never necessarily had a particularly hands-on role when putting the music together, it didn't necessarily matter that he wasn't quite there, as it were.
I'm hanging on your words, living on your breath, feeling with your skin.
I think a lot of the time you have to leave people to find their own way. It is a difficult balance, but it's not like a football team where you can just kick them and shout and scream at them. They're actually creative artists, you know. And I was just concerned about A, how long it would take, and B, if it would sound any good.
Somehow that record got finished. I have to say that my part in it was probably very little. The only thing I felt that I really did on that record was do what I felt was probably my all-time greatest vocal on Condemnation.
Condemnation. Try. Here on the stand with the book in my hand, truth on my side, accusation.
That track would have been, under normal circumstances, a Martin vocal, but Dave had a very strong feeling he wanted to sing it.
I sang the song a couple of times, and something clicked for me, something worked. I put my heart and soul into it, and Flood was really kind of blown away.
Even though he was on heroin and wasn't there most of the time, whenever he went into the studio and did a vocal, it was amazing.
Please open your eyes.
So I felt like I'd sort of done my bit, but most of the rest of the time I'd sort of would sporadically come in and out of the studio and blurt out some ideas and then go back and lock myself in my room. But it was probably really hard for the rest of the guys.
He did at least offer a lot of positive encouragement, and even though he was a bit flaky on occasion, it wasn't necessarily so much of a problem for me so much as other issues which, such as communication between myself and Martin, was at an all-time low, really. We've never been great communicators, but we really just weren't seeing eye to eye. We weren't necessarily agreeing on ideas, but a lot of that was unsaid. So there'd be an underlying tension always around, where someone's not happy, but no one's telling anyone else. And of course, you push those problems underneath; they become more and more difficult to deal with. And yeah, I think there was a lot of kind of just sort of hiding away and getting on with it. So it was a difficult period, but we did get through it eventually, and by the time we got to Hamburg, things were much better.
I don't know what it was, whether it was the atmosphere, it started like that, or whether it became
bad
like that.
karma, wasn't it, at the beginning of that album?
I wasn't going to use that word, but I think that describes it perfectly. You use it. It was just an unpleasant time. It wasn't. But the second period, they seemed to click, or there was more tolerance, at least.
I think it was partly because they were going to back into a normal studio environment. I think it's partly because they settled back into more of a working relationship. And they'd ironed out quite a lot of the musical issues by then.
There was still a degree of, we're making something that's really good, but it's like all the little things weren't going well. It was like we'd had a run of great luck, and then on songs all the luck had evaporated. Everybody had camped into their little area and they were sticking to their guns, whereas on Violator it was much more of a collective effort. You'd have disagreements, but people would see that it was for a greater thing. Judas was the last track we mixed, and I can always remember it's like the last day of mixing the whole album, and Alan and Martin are sitting on the couch arguing about it. Arguing.
Is simplicity best, or simply the easiest? The narrowest path is always the holiest. To walk on barefoot for me.
Every way down the album, there was always somebody who had a disagreement about something, be it me, be it the band, be it, whoever. And there's nothing that I can remember that went smoothly about it.
Man will survive the harshest conditions and stay alive through difficult decisions. So make up your mind for me, walk the line for me, if you want my love.
Violator's got a much more of a sort of eyes wide open feel about it. It's much less confrontational. But Songs, I felt, was something that was like this thing sitting in the corner that you approach with care. In a way, it's an exact tribute to capturing the emotions of the time and the chemistry between the people, both those records.
It was a difficult record to make, really difficult in the end. And I think it was a real sense of relief when it was finished.
Everything was changing around that record then, and I mean, to the extent I changed, I moved on as well, partway through that record. So, yeah, there was a lot of volatility, shall we say, it's just, it didn't affect the result. These were internal things that were going on, and it didn't, it doesn't affect the audience. The audience really are not privy to that stuff. So the demand for the band was still massive. I mean, this was the follow-up record and tour to what had been a massive, international record before that. So, from the audience point of view, it was all hunky-dory.
Bruce Kirkland actually got hold of me, and I was living in Earl's Court in London in this flat, and like I said, I was a mess. And by that time, pretty much unable to even leave my flat. But I remember for some reason I picked up the phone, and it wasn't something I often did. And it rang, and there was Bruce, and he said, "Yeah, it's Bruce. You're number one in USA, and you're number one in the UK." And it was like simultaneously in the same, which was apparently some kind of feat.
I was amazed. I was away on holiday at the time. I remember getting a fax, saying that the album had gone number 1 in 17 countries.
They're at the top of the heap, and they've won. They're number 1 on the mainstream chart.
Yes, I think America was shocking how big it became, and certainly that was a pinnacle point, which helped to even increase things further, and that was a highlight. But yes, it was interesting how big it was and how ferocious the fans were.
It was very pleasing because we felt in Germany is a big part of the development of Depeche, of the building process of Depeche, and the reflection to other countries abroad,
More than double platinum, more than 700,000 albums. It was really a major, with lots of success for. And doing an album after so big success is always very, very difficult.
By then, we were at the point of this is a big band, and you've got to play it, and you can't not play it. And we were okay. We were over the hump, if you like. Violator had taken us over that hump to where people were starting to say, we have to play these records.
As the organiser of the Q Awards, it was then we thought, we've got to get them to Q Awards, because this is one of the big UK bands, and no one's ever given them an award. It just seemed wrong.
It was incredibly satisfying, and a big relief, I suppose. Everybody took pressure off people, but it was definitely, relief of tension at that point.
We did know that we were going out on a huge tour after that. And of course, that's always, a little bit scary.
It was a first for me. I'd never designed a stage before, and I had no idea about cost, and I didn't realize how much work it was, because all those screens, you had to make films and then work out the delay in everything.
You can see here there's 2 levels. There was a main level on the say ground floor, as it were, which was Dave's stage, main stage for Dave, where he could run around. Then you have the top stage, where the synthesizers would be, so Martin, Allen and Fletcher would be on the top stage. I would then have video screens put in between the 2 stages.
I was very excited when I saw the production for the first time and all the film screens. When we put the tapes together for the show and we rehearsed, and it all sounded great, and I thought, this is going to be fantastic. And then when audiences turn up and see that and it all works, that's a great buzz, and much more than going to number 1.
As long as the album continues to sell and the singles continue to chart and radio continues to play, you can continue to tour, and in fact you should continue to tour. Touring is probably the one thing that most UK acts don't do. Depeche Mode always did do.
The bigger the production, the longer you've got to stay on the road in order to pay for it, basically. You know, it costs so much to keep it out on the road. It doesn't make sense to build such an enormous production and then play 5 dates with it.
We spent about 9 months making it, and then 3 or 4 weeks off, and then we're in rehearsals. You know, the tour was more than 150 shows. It was immense, you know.
I wasn't surprised by the length of it. I think the problem with the Depeche Mode tour was that it really spotlighted everything that was kind of going wrong internally. You know, whatever conflicts existed within the band were amplified by night after night, you know, the grueling nature of being on the road.
I think it, you know, nearly killed us all, you know, physically, for sure.
Especially back then, it was like endless parties, and you know, it was just out of control.
You know, to always have a smiling face and be positive when you're taxed. You're up late, you're touring, you're doing after show meet and greets, you're doing early morning press, you're doing TV interviews during the day. It's tough. It's a tough life for a band.
Martin had a couple of hospital visits himself, and Fletch was really a mess too.
Dave was just loving it. He was just on a different planet. On that whole tour, you know, I was still depressed, clinically depressed. It was very difficult for me.
Fletch didn't finish the tour, as I recall, and Martin had a very difficult time in the middle of that tour. Toward the end, I don't know how Dave got through it. I mean, the most impressive thing about Dave is, even in the midst of all that turmoil, I don't think he ever missed a show. I mean, maybe we canceled one show, and if you'd been there at that time, you couldn't have imagined that.
We'd already been on the road for, I don't know, ages, or getting on for a year, and then we got to Australia and we still had ages to go as well.
We were limping along, really. It was just getting harder and harder, I think, really, for everybody, and the fact that there didn't seem to be an end to it was just like, you know, driving everyone mad. Well, the last section of the tour, which was going back to America and going to South America, there was a discussion about that, and I was actually against it personally, because I thought the band were not in good enough shape to do it. But they went ahead and did it, and Fletch ended up becoming a casualty of that and having to come off the tour.
Some of us felt that Fletch should just go home and get well, because he wasn't very well. As simple as that. And whatever we had to do to sort of allow that to happen, we had to do, which meant rehearsing someone else up for the final leg. We'd committed to a lot of shows.
So they had a meeting in Melbourne at the Como Hotel, didn't they? I went out to dinner, and then I come back and I said, I'm just checking my messages, and I got a message from Dave saying, we've had the meeting, Fletcher's going to go home, you're joining. So I was never actually asked, I was told.
Well, Daryl was pretty good, you know. He took over without too much fuss.
We went to Hawaii, didn't we? Fletch did his last 2 shows, and then Alan was teaching me in a hotel room in Hawaii for 10 days while everyone else was on the beach. So I was come down from my hotel room for the first show, and I had my keyboard under my arm, and the old biddy thought I was the entertainment for the hotel bar. Did she?
Sao Paulo, that was the first gig, wasn't it, with, where you were on stage, where I think you were a little bit nervous. Was when you discovered that adrenaline was brown, wasn't it?
No, I didn't realise that your knees do actually knock together when you're nervous, and he didn't tell me that the third show was in Buenos Aires to 80,000 people. He just dropped it into the conversation as we were walking up the steps. Yeah, that was good though. And then we went home, and then we went back and did we did another 33 shows in America. Yeah,
I got a plaque for everybody at the end of that tour, didn't I, to say that, you know, congratulations, you have survived.
I survived the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour. I don't think anybody really did. I don't think anybody was ever the same after that tour.
I got 2 though. That's what I can't work out.
Yeah, it's one for each personality.
Rock and roll tours are a nightmare. It's a real challenge to come through a rock and roll tour and keep your health even, because the pressures are. I mean, it sounds, you know, a bit funny, doesn't it? Because obviously you got first class flights and limos and top hotels and anything you want, but that's part of the problem. I think that's part of the problem of the emotional pressure. Really, on a rock and roll tour, the whole aim, even if the tour manager is your dearest friend, and the whole aim is to just get the band on stage every night to do a great show, and after that, no one cares.
No one that I knew at that time believed me. When I would come back from the tour, at the end of the tour, I mean, I almost left the business at that point, and I think everybody that was on that tour made decisions about whether they were going to continue on in the music business. It was that difficult. And it wasn't until years later that Q wrote that story that said, you know, the most debauched tour in rock history was the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour, and I would say, goddamn right.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Be good. Thank you.
It was a difficult album to make, but at the same time, it's one of my favourite albums that we've ever made.
I think something broke in me during the making of that. And again, I say it's perverse because I feel it actually sort of moves me more than anything else we've done. And yet my memories of it are very dark. And I remember thinking during, I think it was the second 5-week period that we spent in Madrid, I said to myself, don't forget this moment, because this is how bad it gets. And I had it in my mind that, you know, we must never allow this situation to occur again, and if I still feel this way, you know, further down the line, then I should perhaps just say, well, that's it, you know.
Well, I'm down on my knees again, and I pray to the only one who has the strength to bear the pain, to forgive all the things that I've done. Oh, girl, lead me into your darkness when this world is trying its hardest to leave me unimpressed. Just one caress from you and I'm blessed. When you think you've tried every road, every avenue, take one more look. What you found old and something new. Oh girl, lead me into your darkness when this world is trying its hardest to